Bueno, buenas tardes. Gracias, Marta.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Innovate
Thank you, Marta.
or die. I think it's quite clear what the session's about, no? So welcome to all of you. Thank you for listening to my English. I should really do this in Spanish, but it's not good enough, I'm afraid. A tiny bit about myself. I've been 30 years in fundraising, worked in almost 50 countries, not over, and been responsible for about $1.5 billion euros worth of fundraising. And I do live in Madrid. And these are some of the companies that I work with, co-own, and many of our colleagues from these companies are in the audience today. There's a curse in Chinese that says, may you live in interesting times. I think in Spain we live in very, very interesting times, as you may have gathered. Who put the pain in Spain? Well, we've got an economic crisis, we've got all kinds of other crises going on, but the one area actually we don't have a crisis is fundraising. So I'm not going to say we're in crisis in fundraising, we are fundraising within a crisis. And the interesting thing is I work all over the world. I meet people from wherever. I'll be in London, Geneva, Johannesburg, and Holland in the next 3 weeks. And they always say to me, but you can't possibly be raising funds in Spain. It's a crisis. And they cannot believe that many of you are growing, expanding your organizations, testing new things, etc., and not only surviving, but thriving. But the one thing we as fundraisers can never, ever take for granted is the current situation and the way we do things without changing. Any crisis that we have, and my fundraising career began in the 1980s, and there's a few of you old enough to remember the 1980s, and certainly in England we had economic crisis, political crisis, we had riots on the streets, we had a war with Malvinas, which led to me going to jail for protesting it. It was not a great time to be raising funds, you might think. And yet it was a fantastic time to raise funds. We were pioneering European fundraising at that time. It was great to have an enemy like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, in my case, to raise funds against, and the struggling Nicaraguan Salvadorians to raise funds for. The crisis was also an opportunity. And in this 1 hour, I hope that I can show you that we need, as a group, as a team, as a community of fundraisers, to take advantage of the situation, to change the way we do things, adopt new ideas, know when it's the right idea to stop doing some things so we can grow and thrive during the years ahead. Now, I call the session Innovate or Die. Now, I'm not old enough to remember the dodo. That would be a little bit before my time. But when I first went to America, Pan Am existed. The first little computers that you could do things on was called a Zion. Anybody ever have one of those? This is in the early 1990s, and you could send emails and everything. Those things in the middle. Anybody a BlackBerry user? Probably not for much longer, are we? And Nokia, sorry to raise the issue with a Norwegian in the audience. Oh, it's a Finnish, isn't it? It's Finnish. Nordics in the audience. Nokia, at one point, had 80% of the global mobile telephone market. And it's crashed. So we cannot even take for granted if we're working for an Oxfam Intermon or an Intermon Oxfam, depends which week it is, I think, or UNICEF or another big brand, the Red Cross, that times will not change. We have to adapt to the times. Unless you innovate or die, you'll be leaving a legacy of the dead, unreformed non-profit organization in Spain. And don't get me wrong, non-profit organizations do die. It has happened. It's happened in other countries. They've crashed through not innovating and changing. So our role as fundraisers now is to prepare for that challenge. What's happening? We've got public funding cuts here in Spain. Many of your organizations probably depended on government funding, regional government funding, funding from the city or community you live in. And in all those years, we had a boom economy. I recall having meetings with organizations in Spain saying, We don't need to fundraise. We get all the money from the state. How many of those organizations still exist? You are here as a group of people because you do not want to join those organizations who have died through lack of funding. But we need to be creative. What little money there is still being shared within a large number of organizations. And even in the fundraising world in Spain, there is now increasing competition from organizations having to join the fundraising world as there's no other means of getting funds. So in my opinion, it's time for some fresh thinking. There's that whole thing about thinking out of the box. It sounds very normal, let's think out of the box. How many of you really have done something truly different in the way you've thought about your fundraising or your program in the last year? I ask people quite often, do you know what zero-based budgeting is? Anybody in the audience know what zero-based budgeting is? I don't know how that translates into Spanish, but it's interesting. Somebody knows. Okay. The thing about zero-based budgeting is you do that. You start with zero. You don't take last year's budget and say, where do we change 5% here, 10% there, move a little bit here, move a little bit there. Zero-based budgeting is when you literally sit down with a blank sheet of paper and say, I have got to raise this. What am I going to do? And you start building from the bottom up. Very challenging intellectually. Perhaps not if you're a very, very new organization, because you're starting from zero anyway. But I ask you, if you're in an established organization, just for once, don't look at last year's budget and actually start from zero. Would you really hold that gala dinner that lost you money last year? Would you really keep selling T-shirts, which we've got a basement full and nobody's buying? Would you really be doing certain activities you've done forever, and it's part of your culture, but actually, is it really part of your fundraising as opposed to just part of your culture? In other words, is it delivering to the bottom line? It's not an easy exercise. When I joined Greenpeace in the year 1993, Greenpeace globally was going bankrupt. That's hard to believe for an organization that raises $200 million a year, euros a year, and is all over the world. But it was going bankrupt. Why? Because it had based its entire fundraising mentality on direct mail. It was in certain countries which were losing money, like Ireland, like Finland. It had a record company that was losing money, a publishing company that was losing money, and nobody dared do anything about it. And the only solution was to close them, exactly as you do in a corporation. Focus on the profit centers, close the loss centers, invest in new opportunities, and switch the mentality to monthly giving. There are some people who went through that with me. There are a few ex-Greenpeace people here from that time. And it worked, and now Greenpeace continues to grow. Think about your own organization. Think about the sacred cows that your president or CEO insists you do every year, and have a genuine thought about whether to cancel them. Why do you also need to innovate? Great fundraising involves risk. I hope some of you have had some truly, truly spectacular fundraising failures. Because one of the best ways to learn is to test, fail, fail, test again, get it right. And that's how we got the light bulb. Edison didn't suddenly wake up and invent the light bulb. He failed thousands of times and so forth. One of the cultures that we've got in fundraising is we keep doing things till they slowly die. Anybody here still doing direct mail fundraising in Spain and making a profit? The funny thing is it worked in the 90s, but this market actually took a fairly active decision to stop direct mail. It wasn't working. The rest of the world, it's still slowly dying into the grave, and people struggle to find new things. But what's also changing is donors. When I started fundraising 30 years ago, a donor was happy to receive a direct mail piece. You thought you had to send them 12 newsletters a year because without it they would feel lonely. And things like digital and face-to-face weren't invented. And now the donor's expectation is so much higher. One newsletter is probably what they don't want. They certainly probably don't want 12 newsletters, and they certainly probably don't like the newsletters that most of you send them, because let's be frank, if you read most charity newsletters, and I do, They're full of people in the charity talking about themselves. I won't name the organization, but there's one here in the room probably, certainly in Spain, that has its president's photo up to 19 times in a magazine. I'm sure the donors know who the president is by now. And no guesses. And actually what worked for one generation won't work for another. You know, a 25-year-old donor is not going to like you for sending them lots of printed material. They might just about be happy with a tweet in between all the other things that they're doing. And the other thing is you can't afford to be left behind. What one organization starts with and is the pioneer of gets the typical thing in business, which is the first mover benefit. Greenpeace invented face-to-face fundraising in Austria in the mid-1990s. It's still probably the world's most profitable organization for face-to-face in Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea, and these markets, because it's invariably the first one into those markets, and either UNICEF or Save the Children coming shortly afterwards. So the solution is in our hands. We have to be looking every day at our work and thinking, what can we do better? What can be changed? What can we bring to the mix that is different to the previous year? Because just with every single organization, every single industry, every cell phone, we've got to adapt for the times. You know, is actually Apple going to be the next business to go out of business, even though it's iconic at the moment? So what constitutes innovation? There are several forms. You may not all be the inventors of a fundraising tool, but you can be testing new tools constantly. How many of you are plotting the product life cycle of your fundraising? Does anybody know what product life cycle is? Essentially, when you're creating products, they have a growth period when you're testing and learning. Then they're bringing in lots of money, and like all products, they start to die off. The problem with fundraising is very often we're still working on the downward curve, and there's nothing else coming in the upward curve. Have any of you done the Boston Matrix on your fundraising program? Yes. Acción contra el Hambre for sure has done the Boston Matrix, and some of you probably even work with the Boston Consulting Group. But the Boston Matrix makes you plot your fundraising tools into boxes. You've got rising stars. Digital, as Beate's been teaching you this morning, is a rising star still. You've got the cash cows, face-to-face and telephone probably in Spain right now. And you've got the dead dogs, which is the direct mail, press advertising, and so forth. But look at all of your activities and try to plot them on that grid. Sometimes you may have an existing tool that has stopped working, but when you integrate it, as we'll look later, it suddenly makes a difference again. So let's look at some of those. The other thing is, why is your organization worthy of support? Are you truly standout? There's a question we often ask our clients is, if you close tomorrow, would anybody notice? And I'm not specifically picking on child sponsorship charities, but let's be frank, there are a lot of child sponsorship charities. What distinguishes you to the donor versus another? I know when we call some child sponsorship or sponsors, individuals, they say, yes, yes, I'm a sponsor of a child for charity X. And in fact, they're a sponsor for charity Y. What they know is they sponsor a child. They just can't really remember who for, because it looks and feels the same very often. So let's do less talk and more for action. Let's take some action. There's some very good articles around now about let's stop using excuses. You know, it's not the economy, it's not my boss. Stop making excuses and let's focus inwards. What I've loved about this conference the last 2 days is that I have not heard one single voice saying it's terrible because of the crisis. 3 or 4 years ago, people were saying that. I think you've got beyond it. And that is great credit to the people in this room today and your colleagues who aren't here. How many of you are real donors to your charities? Cash. Okay, 20% maybe. How many of you are regular donors to your charities every month? About 15%. How many of you have left a legacy to your charity in your will? Well, that is good. That is growing, but it's about 15 people out of this room. The truth is, if you don't donate, if you don't give money, not just the time because you're being paid for that, or your volunteers in your organization, you have got to be a donor. And I highly recommend you donate as a minimum to your charity, and if you can, to 2 or 3 others. Because it's fantastic looking at the way your competitors or colleagues in other charities communicate to you. Some will be better, some will be worse. But if you don't donate, you can't ask for money, in my view. It's immoral. One of the challenges we have in Spain, and it's still a challenge, and it's great there is a company here at the conference showing software solutions, is we have very, very poor data analysis compared to many other markets. And as an industry, as Adrian Sargent was showing yesterday, we have virtually no analysis of fundraising in a true market analysis form. I beg you, if you don't know how to analyze your data, speak to us. There are many, many things that you could be doing with your databases today that you're simply not doing. How many of you are really actively plotting lifetime value of your donors? Not one. Oh, there was one hand at the back, I think. To give you an idea, in the UK, we started lifetime value analysis probably in the 90s, which was still late, but we're not doing it here in Spain. And as Adrian was saying yesterday, we're investing as much on those donors who give us very little and may lose us money as we are on those who could be giving us substantial amounts of money during their lifetime. As it says in red there, or there, really focus on where the money is. Focus on monthly giving. You may not know this, but actual fact, Spain is one of the highest percentage of regular monthly giving through the bank, domiciliación, in the world. Donors in Spain give through the bank about 3 times more as a percentage than in the United States. Donors in Spain are extremely generous. At 13 euros, 15 euros, 18 euros a month, Spanish donors are giving at 3 times what a typical Dutch donor gives to the equivalent charity. So we are sitting on a gold mine within our existing donors, but we know very little about them, and we know very little about how to maximize their value. So focus on the cash cow, which is monthly giving, and I strongly encourage you in fundraising, the buzzword nowadays, and has been for a while, is integration. Spain has pretty much pioneered the use of high-volume inbound SMS as a tool for generating leads and converting by telephone. It's the envy of the world. There's still more you could be doing. I don't think we've cracked the nut of really making direct response television work in Spain. There's something to be done there. And I'm absolutely certain we haven't maximized the value of integrated social media, or even the simple things that Beate was talking about in her session of maximizing the value from your website. So there's more to be done. I won't go into too much detail about why focusing on committed donors, because we know that in Spain, and it's long term. What we don't know too well, I think, is how to convert those donors into friends for life, into people who are really committed to our organizations. There's still work to be done. I think it's been covered in other sessions over the last 2 days, but how many of you actually run a Love Your Donor Week? Anybody? This is actually truly a week of activity, February the 13th to 17th, 2012, in which organizations actively loved their donors. What does Love Your Donor mean? It can be as simple as sending them a thank you. A thank you that doesn't necessarily ask for money, but tells them what their money has done. It might be calling some of them who are significant lifetime value donors and thanking them and asking them if they're happy with you. In the 1970s, early 1970s, the chief executive of Oxfam in the UK, which at that time was the very largest charity in the United Kingdom, every Friday was given a list of 5 names of people who donated to Oxfam. And he picked up the phone and he said, "Hello, it's Charles here from Oxfam. Thank you for donating to our organization. I'm just calling to say thank you." And it wasn't major donors, it was pretty much random donors who supported them. And he asked them, why do you support us? And he got probably more valuable feedback from those calls than most of us get through our surveys. But the other point that was learned at those early days is those thank you calls got talked about. How many of you call your donors to thank them? Not after their first gift, because you should be doing that anyway. How many of you actually call your donors by telephone 3 months into the relationship and say thank you? I know some of you do, because we do it with you. But most of you don't. What do you think the impact of that thank you is? That thank you reduces attrition. It makes people feel valued. You can ask their opinion on something, and you could even check that you've got all their details right. Or do you want the newsletter, or would you prefer a digital version? You can ask something that enhances your knowledge of that donor. But guess what you can do afterwards as well? If they're really happy, and this is what we do, is we ask people, do you have friends or colleagues like you who might like to support the same charity? And if those of you were in Adrian's session yesterday, you'll see that proximity, knowing that your friends support an organization, increases giving because it's people like you. And whatever you do, think of the donor not as a static relationship, but a journey. As they grow older, as you grow older, as your organization changes, make sure you're adapting to that organization. Because even the kid who came in on an SMS, at some point he's going to be 60 and will have probably a different set of needs of the relationship than then. So the most important thing we can keep doing is saying thank you, but think of ways of saying thank you. Anybody has a special thank you means? Does anybody send a thank you greetings card to your donors? Like birthday card? Some of you. Anybody get that one from Courting Glaze, which you can't really figure out why the hell they sent it? You know, Courting Glaze always remembers my birthday, which is about the only person who does. But at least you get a national holiday, because it's the 12th of October. Anybody know what a love mark is? No? No, it's not one of those things that, yes, okay, I can think. Love marks was a way of actually seeing how people value brands. So on the top right-hand corner there, you'll see high love, high respect. That's where you want to be as a charity. If you're selling a good that breaks, that falls to pieces, you're probably going to be low love, low respect, and not necessarily a repeat purchase. But how many charities actually actively get involved in looking where they are? You can actually measure this because some brands are extremely good at it. And one of the brands that rates very highly in the love marks analysis is Amnesty. How many of us here are members of Amnesty? Quite a few, quite a few. Some people work for Amnesty and they donate to it, which is even better. The point is Amnesty, Greenpeace, these are love-hate organizations. You tend not to hate Amnesty because why would you? You can hate Greenpeace. But those that support Greenpeace are passionate, as we heard even in one of the exercises this morning from somebody who said, that drives me, that makes me excited, that organization. But why aren't we there featuring along with Amnesty with our organizations? And as I said, would it really matter if our organization disappeared tomorrow? What happened when Steve Jobs died in 2011? It was almost like the world went into mourning. It was like a dry run for Nelson Mandela. Bloomberg Businessweek produced an entire edition only about, this is the cover, Steve Jobs. They'd never done that before, about anybody. Because what did he do? He told us that there was something we didn't know what needed, an iPhone, an iPad, an Apple computer, and convinced us we had to have it. It's a must-have product. Is your charity a must-have product? iPod, therefore I am. You know, most of our organizations are not must-haves. Funnily enough, Amnesty is probably one of them because, okay, there is Human Rights Watch, but nobody else is occupying that space globally. Is anybody occupying your space? How can you make it different? How many of you are planning income growth of, say, 20% next year? Anybody? 50% growth next year? Why not? Why are you not planning for that growth? It's completely achievable, but it's hard to convince yourself that it's achievable or convince your colleagues. There are organizations in Spain growing like that. There are organizations, as we'll see, growing at even greater rates. And how many of you are truly integrating your organization? How many have an integrated communications, advocacy, and fundraising strategy? Some hands kind of go, yeah, some of the campaigning organizations. But quite often, you're in different databases. How many have your journalist database on the same set of databases as your supporters? Anybody? So in other words, you don't know that journalist that you're trying to convince to run that great piece of editorial about your work, that case study when one of your colleagues was in Africa or on mission or whatever, but you don't even know if that journalist you're trying to convince is actually a donor. It might be helpful information. Yeah? It's sometimes, I was doing some work with Oxfam. I'm doing quite a lot of work with Oxfam, and a few years ago, they did an analysis of their databases. Oxfam supporters in the UK had more than 30 separate relationships with Oxfam on 30 different databases, and none of them were integrated. So there were people leaving them £100,000 legacies who'd never been a donor. And as far as the organization was concerned, they'd never had a relationship with Oxfam. And why? Because they were actually volunteers in an Oxfam shop selling second-hand goods, and they'd volunteered for 25 years. It was probably the focal point of their life, but it wasn't on the supporter database. Nobody knew about it. They were probably worth more than many of the donors giving money in reality. You really need to put that data together. You need to know how many relationships your organization is having. Because again, I think Amnesty UK had 30-odd relationships going with its donors. The point is, you don't know what somebody else is telling your donor, and you think you're communicating clearly to them. But somebody else has already been sending them another message that may not even be aligned to yours. Social media. Anybody making lots of money from Twitter, Facebook? Lots of money from Twitter? Okay, I think we need to ask this lady to share her example because she might go down in a history book. If you can run up with the microphone, that would be great. Put your hand up, please, so the lady can see you. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
in Espanol or?
Okay. It's not an NGO that I work for. It's a platform, a fundraising platform, and we collaborate with NGOs putting this platform for fundraising. And it's actually social media where we get new donors for our organizations. We do it through LinkedIn, we do it through Facebook, through Twitter, and we write a lot of blogs where we encourage people, where we write personal stories or individual stories about whatever story of help this kid, help this woman, or help this fundraiser make this possible, or why they should do it.
And how do you get people to donate? Through Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn? Do you drive them somewhere else to make the donation? Encourage them to go somewhere
we
else?
write the blogs, and then we have it depends if it's a blog about, let's say, the crisis in Syria, and then we redirect it if they want to help. Do you want to make a difference? Do you want to help? Then they can be redirected to the platform, to the fundraiser pages that we have for organizations that are doing something with Syria or
Fantastic.
whatever.
Thank you. Anybody want to speak to her afterwards? I think she can help you raise some money through Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. But by and large, it's a lot of noise. You can make a lot of noise about your charity. Somebody needs to be making a lot of money soon because it's not being made in great numbers, is it, Beate? No, she's an expert. It is? Yes. She's making money from it as well, so speak to her as well. But certainly one of the things that new media is giving us an opportunity to do is to generate massive volumes of leads, contacts, encouraging people to contact you or register on a platform or leave an email address somewhere, and that then gives you the opportunity to get back to people. I think all too often many of these organizations that I know of are sending lots of lovely messages about the work. Where's the call to action? Use social media to generate energy, as some of the organizations like Change.org are doing. Using your cell phone to generate sponsors, as Plan has done in the UK, and sending out messages through the cell phone to donors or to people who've expressed an interest through sending an SMS to something else related to you. In the UK right now, and as we've seen in Spain with some of the charities here, there are enormous campaigns going on, not to make people go to the website, which was kind of what we all did in the past, but simply to generate responses through SMS. This is a cancer charity, and its messages about how to check for breast cancer. It's the famous Breakthrough Breast Cancer again. But it's send an SMS to get information about breast cancer, and then when you send the information, you have the opportunity to convert these people to donors, because they could also become supporters of the organization. The English love their animals probably more than their children, it's fair to say. RSPCA is a hugely popular Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but adverts like this on trains, bus shelters, in washrooms are generating very large volumes of micro donations, €1, €5 donations, but increasingly it's becoming possible to convert these into monthly donors. Christian Aid, better known in Spain as Inspiraction, is running these on the London Metro, on the tube. And again, it's a call to action. It's got a very clear ask, but the response is sending a text for £3 a month. But through the text, not through the website or any other means, or capturing email. Why? Because when somebody texts you, you capture the data immediately. You have their contact. It's not got a mistake in it because it registers as a real number. Again, using different media, and even using, and this isn't happening yet in Spain, but actually doing street fundraising to capture SMS numbers. Now, this is an interesting innovation for me, because one of the big challenges we have with face-to-face globally is that if you sign up donors who are too young through face-to-face, their attrition level, their drop-off rate increases enormously, below 25, below 24, etc., because they probably don't have enough money in the bank. But the one thing somebody between 20 and 25 always has is what? Credit on their cell phone. Because God forbid you don't have credit on your cell phone. My son, a few months ago, had left his phone behind and he couldn't contact us. He made it quite clear he had no means of contacting us because he'd never, ever used a payphone. He didn't know there are still, in some places, landlines and you put money in. Yeah? When was the last time any of us used a payphone? We kind of think we're lost. We have no communication tools without the cell phone. But young people definitely have their cell phones. And would the cost of €2 a month or €3 a month through their cell phone bankrupt them? No, not at all. And besides which, probably their parents are paying the bills, so be careful if you're a parent. Blackboard is a global agency that provides CRM solutions, donor databases, and so forth. They do a state of the non-profit industry analysis every year. But the one tool that is going to absolutely explode, not just for charities but for business, is the cell phone. And we are still so far behind using this, the one tool that we have with us all the time for fundraising. How many people are making lots and lots of money out of mobile communications? And I'm talking hundreds of thousands, millions, anybody? And yet it's the one thing your donors have with them all the time. And how often do we use this as the means of communication to them? Dream, something that fundraisers should be good at. Sometimes it's a nightmare because you've got a budget to make. But what we need to do is we need to dream, but we need to help our donors to dream. Anybody familiar with Peace One Day? Some people may have seen the founder of this present. This was one guy who just thought, and he's kind of a bit hippie-ish, bit crazy, he thought maybe, with everything going around on the world, we could have one day when there's peace. And there'll be no wars, and no domestic violence, and nothing. And he was totally crazy. He had no money to do anything about it, so he got his guitar out and played music on the streets of London and collected cash. And with the cash, he bought stamps. And he wrote to every world leader from at that time. Kofi Annan was heading the UN. He wrote to famous people in film, completely cold. He had no connection to them. The Dalai Lama. And guess what? They wrote back to him. They actually said, what a brilliant idea. Kofi Annan had a meeting with him. The Dalai Lama had a meeting with him. Famous actors had a meeting with him. And he created peace one day. And it's not just a concept, it happens. So this is Peace One Day, I forget what it is. It's this week or last week, it's very soon. For example, in Afghanistan, the Taliban put down their arms for one day, and they allow all the NGOs like the MSFs and the Red Cross and so forth, and inoculate all the children against the killer diseases, and on that one day, the Taliban will just stand aside. Is that a dream? He did it. He actually did it. And it's measurable, and they do measurable impacts on all this, and these are where things are happening on any given day. The Israelis stopped bombing Lebanon, so they could do, all these kind of things going on. And he persuaded these corporations to be his corporate global sponsors. One guy, a guitar, and a dream. And he saved thousands upon thousands of lives, and saved thousands of people from being beaten up, because there are all kinds of activities that go around measuring this. So the idea is to think big. Charity water, any of you familiar with charity water? Again, Scott Harrison, who's there in the picture, I had the pleasure of watching him present his case in Holland, wasn't it? Was it Holland? No, it was in the United States a couple of years ago. And he was speaking to an audience of fundraisers. There were 4,500 of us in that room. It was the AFP. And he was a junkie, alcoholic. His job was to sell high-level alcohol, high-end, expensive brand alcohol in the New York clubs. He spent a lot of his time with prostitutes. He was a cocaine sniffer. And then his mother got sick, and he kind of had something wrong with my life. And then I remember him saying, and at that point I stopped using pornography, which was a pretty good line in a fundraising speech, I thought. And he said, I've got to do something for the world. I know, what's the biggest problem? And somebody said, well, actually, 4,500 kids every day die from lack of clean water. And I'm selling alcohol, and these kids can't even get water. And he formed an organization, 2 organizations, Charity, which does the fundraising, and Water, that does the program. They're separate organizations. The Charity funds the water bit. And literally, within 2 years, his organization has grown to, I think, $80 million a year income, last time I looked. And he just used that force of energy, a new idea. If you go to their website, charitywater.org, you will see the phenomenally creative ways in which they raise funds. But more importantly, he leapfrogged almost every other NGO that I've seen in making sure the donors saw where the money went. So you can go to their website, you can donate to a particular project, you'll get the Google reference point on a map, and when that pump of pumping clean water in that community goes live, you get a message, and a Google-generated image and a Google map will say, today that pump went live, thanks to you. Thanks to you. That takes the donor close to the story, even though they're sitting in New York or whatever. So proving it, Google Maps, you partner with Google Maps, and literally ping, 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 you go to the website, and you'll see occasionally while you're on the site, ping, another water pump's gone live. Anybody like that? Anybody doing that kind of creativity? Just in informing and engaging your donors. How many of you actually, when you've asked a donor for an emergency appeal, a special appeal, when you've done something asking for money, how many of you go back and then say, this is exactly what we raised, and this is what we've done with your money? Action Against Hunger. What's your organization here? Sorry? Lucas Koch. That's right, yes. So few of us do that. And I'd like to know where my money's gone, but half the time nobody bothers to tell me. Anybody got an innovation budget? A budget, literally specified innovation. What's the organization? Okay. Okay, an innovation budget. In the business world, a minimum of 20% is spent on innovation. In the charity world, it's very, very hard to identify any organization that has an innovation budget. Think about it. How can you make new things if you're not investing in testing new things, in creating new things? Why was Greenpeace raising $50,000 a month in 1993 from its website when nobody else even had a website? Because they were innovating. They were investing in new ideas. Corporates invest in it. Our sector does very little. Okay, so where do we find out about innovation? Because if you're not going to be innovating, let's find out what other people are doing. You're at this Congress. I bet every one of you has left this Congress so far with some idea of some new innovations that are happening in the sector, some innovations other organizations are doing, and you can take some of that home and apply it to your organization. But we're only in a conference maybe once a year. So let's go see where else we can find innovation. There are blogs, Lucy Innovation. I highly recommend 101 Fundraising, which is a great blog written by all volunteers, fundraisers, who put up their ideas and debates. Sophie, where many of the stories of fundraising are located from around the world. And if you want to find out about a great story on whatever, major donor fundraising, the actual case studies are there and presented and analyzed. And it's all free. And thanks to one of our colleagues at the office, Sophie is now even translated into Spanish. So there is a Spanish version of some of the key articles in Sophie. In this case, there you go. Attend the IFC. I know some of you have. I know it's very expensive. Build it into your budget. Once every 3 years, I go to a global conference where you'll really discover what's happening in 65 countries, the number of countries who attend that. I mean, we're even fantastically lucky this year because Marta, where's she sitting? Because she won that prize, has won an invite from Chris Contrail Cancer to go there to learn and to present, hopefully, what will be their winning entry into the fundraising innovation. Look online. There is actually Innovation Forum, 50 fundraising ideas. There's lots of information you can find. As we're running into the last 15 minutes, engage your donors. Now, that's very easy. If you're Amnesty, yes, we're stopping people from being falsely imprisoned, tortured, etc. For Greenpeace, yes, that's a campaign. Every one of your organization needs to make some social change, whether it's more rights or more activities for older people, whether it's more money to invest in cancer, whether it's better testing in the medical system for breast cancer. You've got a demand you are putting upon the political and social establishment. Engage your donors, get them to say, yes, I want, or no, stop. Anybody who gets engaged with your cause becomes loyal, more loyal. It builds loyalty. They've done something more than give. Work with change.org, our great sponsors here, and use that, again, lead generation, activist generation. Who are the best donors? Donors or activists? Any idea? Activists are better donors than donors who are not activists, globally. Think of organizations like Coney that went from nothing to millions of people, mobilizing people. There are organizations like Avaz, etc. Activism builds loyalty. We really do need to get this into our minds. So to some degree, it's keep your coins. I want change. And dare to be different. Do something that stands out. Sound, please.
Hi, I'm Simon Griffiths, co-founder of Who Gives a Crap. We reckon every trip to the bathroom should be a feel-good experience. So we've spent the last 2 years developing the only toilet paper that delivers one every time. Who Gives a Crap? It's a breakthrough on so many levels. Let me take you through them. It's better for the environment, and we've cut the nasties, so it's better for your body. That feels good. But unlike other recycled toilet paper, we're all about comfort. So it has a beautiful fluffy texture and low PTR, or poke-through rate. That feels good. You can choose to buy it off the shelf or have it home delivered. Either way, it costs the same as other brands, but comes with 1,200% more punts. That feels good. But here's where we're really on a roll. 50% of our profits go to sanitation projects in the developing world. You see, while a trip to the bathroom can be the ultimate feel-good experience for some, for many, it's not, because 2.4 billion people don't have access to a proper toilet. The bad stuff ends up in waterways, causing diseases that fill half the hospital beds in the developing world. That doesn't feel very good. And that's why we're donating 50% of our profits to WaterAid. WaterAid help the world's poorest people access clean water, sanitation, and hygiene education. They're literally saving the world from the bottom up. It's as simple as that. We take something that everybody needs and use the proceeds to help people in need. And that feels really good. Heading up Who Gives a Crap, Jehan Ratnatunga in LA, Danny Alexander in New York, and myself down in Melbourne, Australia. We're engineers and product designers who in 2010, through a shared passion for humanitarian aid and toilet humour, developed a business model that grabbed a lot of headlines and won a bunch of awards for entrepreneurship. We're busting to press go on the first production run and create Who Gives a Crap's first edition. Our feel-good toilet paper needs a feel-good price. And for that, we have to order in bulk. But we need $50,000 to make that happen. Basically, we need toilet paper.
To succeed as fundraisers, because actually there is the mission, there's the vision, there's the stories of our beneficiaries, but it's you and you and you who's making the difference in fundraising. We need to adapt to survive. I've been 30 years in the business, and what I'm doing now has nothing to do with what I was doing 30 years ago. Sadly, I was doing rock concerts and things like that. That was fun. But we need to change and we need to equip ourselves for the future. We need to be more involved and integrated with our organizations. We need to make sure we are responsible for the results. This is a great blog that says you're the reason for the results, not the economy. I won't go through that. You'll get it in the presentation. But believe in the power we have to influence the results. So be prepared to change yourself, to change the world. I told you had to have Martin Luther King, you said. So we need to have a vision, and the vision is not 5% growth or stands. It's a vision of change, of making a big difference. We need to have the optimism of this amazing gentleman who spent 28 years in jail and still came out smiling and manages, even at his tender years of 93 or whatever, to have a force emotionally upon us across the world. His optimism flows through all of us. Ambition. Nothing's too hard, although take that as you wish with that image. We need to work together. This conference is about us cooperating. It's about us sharing. Legado Solidario is a flagship. In fact, we were talking today, maybe something could be done similar in Denmark. Charities working together to enhance things like legacy giving in Spain. We've talked about innovation. We need to innovate. We can't be doing business as usual. We need to be entrepreneurs. Now, that might sound very strange when you're in a charity, but we need to think as creatively as the Richard Bransons or the Facebook Zuckerman or whatever. We've got to be there, and we've got to be entrepreneurial. We can't run them as badly run fundraising businesses. We've got to invest. George Soros gave $100 million to Human Rights Watch, not for the human rights element. He gave the money to build Human Rights Watch into a stronger organization, and that included fundraising. We need data. We are so short of quality data in this market. The AEF captures some data, which is great, and we share it. But what we don't really know is enough about our donors, their behavior, their trends, etc. We need to integrate. As we've seen through various presentations, it's capturing the heart and the mind of our donors and our potential donors. It's not a cerebral act. There's lots of morphines that go through our bodies when we give a donation. There was a study in a university in England last year that showed that when people make a donation, it triggers the same chemical as an orgasm. I think a little bit less, if you ask me, but well, I'm getting old. We need passion. Fundraising is about passion. You know, I used to ask, is there a pessimist in the room? If there's a pessimist in the room right now, go away, because actually you don't belong in this profession. You need to come to fundraising with a passion, a fire. After 30 years, I'm more angry, more passionate than I ever was. And I was pretty damn passionate at 20. You should have seen me. Even Lola might have. Well, anyway. We've got to be brave. Now, some of you may know I wasn't at the conference last year because I broke my nose at the seaside, doing something silly with waves. But this is me jumping off a 30-meter cliff, straight into the ocean, just to prove to my 18-year-old son, even though I'm a fat 50-plus-year-old, I'm still stupid enough to jump off cliffs. But if you don't take risks, what's going to happen? And fundraising, we've got it written in the contracts. Anybody who contracts with our organization gets a contract, and it says, part of our mission, vision, and values is keeping the fun in fundraising. And it's quite funny because many of your CEOs have signed that contract about keeping the fun in fundraising. Fundraising is fun if we can't transmit the pleasure that it gives us and it gives our donors to give and have fun, like that toilet humor. Why be here? So we'll finish with Steve Jobs, I think. People who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. The whole thing is nothing was achieved with people who did not have a crazy idea. Mediocrity will get us nowhere. And that craziness can be you. You need to go back to your offices next week and go, I am going to do something totally radical. I'm going to break something. Not the computer, because that's my job. I'm usually, bloody thing doesn't work again. I won't say what my nickname is it? Fuck you. So our jobs from this meeting is to go out and raise more money, because your causes need it. Gracias. And I'm not the timekeeper, but if there are questions, I think probably, is there a minute or 1 minute? Yeah? Any questions? No? Fantastic, because we've got a tight schedule now. We've got another speaker coming up, so thank you. Go away, raise money, suerte.